Welcome to the Test Management Mindset, insights into the world of software testing. The best content by Practitest in audio form, designed to keep you inspired wherever you are. In today's episode, we're on the topic of coping with testing team growth, how to grow your operations, and while still maintaining your level of expertise and service. Let's get started.
All right, so we're diving into this guide you shared about scaling QA teams, and it's packed with seriously smart advice. So many people want to take their QA team from good to great, but it's tough. How do you scale without losing that magic? That's what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting about scaling a team, especially in QA, is that it's not as easy as just saying, let's hire a bunch more testers.
Right.
Like, you really have to think about how that expertise will grow and if your team structure can actually support that.
It's like you're excited about the growth, of course, but at the same time, you don't want to mess with something that's already working well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the first things that this guide actually digs into. It's like, when does my team actually need to split?
Okay.
And you'd think it's headcount.
Right, just a numbers thing.
Yeah, but it's not.
So what are some of those signs? Like, how do you know when your team is feeling the strain, even if you haven't hit some magic number?
Right. So the guide actually gives a few interesting points here. One is, are you noticing like a lack of interaction between your team members?
Okay.
Is there this sense of information overload where people are like, whoa, I can't keep up with everything?
Oh, yeah.
Those can be red flags. Because if you think about it, when you have a smaller team, that communication just naturally happens.
Yeah.
It's very close-knit.
Yeah.
But as you grow, you have to be a lot more intentional about keeping that going.
Yeah, it's like adding too many people to a group chat. Suddenly it's not fun and casual anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just like you wouldn't want to cram everyone into a single chat. You don't want to force a team structure that like stifles that communication.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So the guide also talks about, should you mirror the development team's structure? Like, is that always the best way to go?
Yeah, that's definitely a common assumption, but this guide really challenges that one-size-fits-all mentality.
That's right.
It stresses the importance of what it calls purpose-driven decisions. And actually, I've seen this firsthand, where there was a company, and they basically just mirrored their dev team structure for QA, and it was a mess.
Really?
Yeah, it's silos, confusion about ownership. It did not work out well.
It seems very intuitive to just copy that structure, but
It seems that way.
right. It sounds like it can really backfire.
It can.
So how do you actually make those purpose-driven decisions? Like, when it comes to structure, how do you know?
Well, I think it really boils down to truly analyzing what your QA team needs to achieve, right? What are the testing tasks?
Yeah.
What are the dynamics that already exist within the team? And even the technologies you use, right? All of these play a role.
Right.
You're finding that structure that makes sense for your situation.
So no shortcuts there. All right. I love this next part. Choosing team leads. Because the guide does not mince words. It's like you don't just promote based on seniority.
It's so important. And the guide really emphasizes that merit should be the deciding factor, right? Because you can imagine just promoting someone because they've been there the longest, that could backfire spectacularly.
Yeah, just because someone's been in a role for a while doesn't automatically mean they're going to be a great leader.
Yeah.
And even if they are, it's still a new role for them. There's going to be a learning curve.
100%. It's a new role, new challenges.
Yeah.
A good manager is going to give them the support and guidance they need to thrive. But choosing those leads based on their actual abilities, their potential impact, that's crucial. Not just for the team success, but for morale too.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked structure, we've talked leadership. Of course, scaling a team also means hiring. And I was really impressed by how much depth the guide went into on this topic.
Yeah, because it's way beyond, we just need more warm bodies.
Right.
The guide really digs into understanding how each new hire shifts that overall makeup of the team.
It's like you're trying to create a well-balanced recipe at this. You need the right mix of experience levels, technical skills, even personalities.
That's such a great analogy. And just like you wouldn't use a cookie-cutter recipe for everything, you can't approach hiring with that mindset either. The guide actually encourages you to take a really hard look at your current team and say, okay, are we heavy on experience, but maybe lacking some fresh perspectives? Do we need specialists? Do we need more generalists? That sort of thing.
So it's about being honest about where those gaps are and then being strategic about how you fill them.
Exactly. And that's where a well-crafted job description comes in.
Right.
It's not just about listing a bunch of skills. It's about attracting the people who will not only fit in, but actually elevate your team.
Absolutely. Okay, so you've attracted those awesome candidates. What's next? I'm guessing the interview process is pretty crucial.
It is, and this is where the guide gets really practical, because it actually says, like, straight up, ditch those generic interview questions you find on the internet.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what should you be asking instead?
Well, it emphasizes tailoring your questions to the actual work that your team does.
Okay.
So you're not testing someone on, like, textbook knowledge.
Got it.
You're trying to understand how they apply that knowledge in your team's specific context.
So smart. So it's about getting at, like, how they think, how they approach problems, how they would actually function on your team.
Exactly, yeah. And one great tip the guide gives is involve other team members in that interview process.
Ooh, I like that. Get different perspectives, see how they interact with their potential colleagues.
Yeah, it's all about finding your people, as the guide says.
I like that. Now, finding them is only half the battle. Once you've got them, onboarding.
Oh, onboarding is so crucial. And this is another area where I was really impressed with the guide's insights.
I feel like we often think of onboarding as, here's your laptop, here's the coffee machine, good luck. But it's got to be more than that, right?
It's way more than that.
Yeah.
It's about truly integrating them into the team culture, making them feel welcome and valued. And there's this one piece of advice that I thought was really interesting.
Okay, what is it?
The guide actually suggests not expecting any deliverables from new hires for the first 2 to 6 weeks.
Wait, really? No deliverables. That's kind of counterintuitive.
It sounds crazy, right? But the logic behind it is actually pretty brilliant. That initial period should be all about deep immersion. Those first few weeks on the job are really when they can soak up the company culture, right? Understand the product inside and out and build relationships with their teammates.
So it's about letting them find their footing before they have to hit the ground running, basically.
Yeah, exactly. You're playing the long game. You're investing that time up front, and you're setting them up for success and creating a stronger team in the process.
I see. Makes a lot of sense when you put it that way because, yeah, rushing things would probably backfire.
Totally.
Now, I also noticed the guide talks about how the manager's role has to kind of evolve as the team grows. I'm guessing that can be kind of tricky, right?
It can be. Because, when you're a manager of a small team, you're naturally more hands-on, right? You're involved in every little detail. But as that team starts to scale, the guide emphasizes shifting to a more strategic role.
So less about, like, knowing every single line of code and more about...
Yeah, more about setting that overall direction, defining the roadmap for the team, making sure everyone's aligned with the company's goals.
Which I imagine is a tough transition for some people, right?
Yeah.
To let go of some of that day-to-day control. Even if you've hired great people, it's still like...
It is. It's one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of leaders, actually.
Yeah.
But the important thing to remember is that delegation is not abdication, right?
Oh, I like that. That's a good distinction.
Yeah.
So you're still involved just in a different way.
Exactly. You're staying informed. You're checking in, making sure things are on track, being there for support. But you're also empowering your team to take ownership and make your own decisions.
Yeah, it all comes back to trust in the end, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And that ties into another point from the guide that really resonated with me, that whole idea of visibility equals value.
Oh, yeah. That's so important. And it's so easy to lose sight of that, as the team grows.
Because you can't be the one with all the answers anymore.
Right. One person can't hold all the knowledge. But what is scalable is positioning your team as that go-to source of expertise for the whole company,
So it's less about, like, you as the manager or any one person being the superstar and more about the collective knowledge of the team shining through.
Yeah, exactly. It's about making sure that knowledge is visible and accessible to everyone. This actually reminds me of this one junior tester I worked with a while back. He was tasked with regression testing.
Okay.
And, a lot of times regression testing can feel like, oh, this is the grunt work.
Right.
But this tester, he was so meticulous. He found this tiny little UI glitch. It was in the checkout flow, and it was so easy to overlook.
Right. No.
It was causing a huge drop in mobile transactions.
Oh, wow. Talk about a small thing with a huge impact.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And because he was so thorough, they were able to catch it before it went live, potentially save the company, who knows how much money, and a PR nightmare for sure.
It's a great example of how literally anyone on the team, no matter how much experience they have, can make a huge difference.
100%, yeah. It's about building that environment where Everyone feels like they can speak up, they can own their work, and they never think something is too small to matter. And that becomes even more important when we start talking about distributed teams, which the guide also gets into.
And it acknowledges that it's not just language barriers that can be a challenge for teams, right?
It's so true, and, language is just one piece of it. The guide actually points out that cultural differences, which are often much more subtle, can be even trickier to deal with.
Because it's, like you said, it's more than just the words themselves. It's those unspoken rules, different communication styles, even the assumptions we make just based on where we come from.
All of that plays a role. A phrase that might be totally fine in one culture could be misinterpreted in another, and that leads to, misunderstandings, conflict, all sorts of issues.
Absolutely. So how do you even begin to bridge that gap? Especially these days, it feels like distributed teams are more and more common.
Yeah, for sure. And the guide actually had a really interesting, simple solution. Travel budgets.
Instead of just going with the cheapest offshoring option, which, like we're saying, can lead to all those communication issues.
Exactly. It actually advocates for investing in face-to-face interaction.
Okay.
Having managers visit their distributed teams at least a couple of times a year, maybe sending team members to visit their colleagues in other countries, that sort of thing.
Because sometimes you just can't beat that in-person connection.
You can't. It allows for those informal conversations, those shared experiences that really build trust and understanding.
Like they say, you can't shake hands over email.
Exactly. Sometimes you just need that human touch. But of course, we know in person isn't always possible. So when you're dealing with distance, the guide really stresses the power of visual communication.
So going beyond just the phone calls, the emails.
Yeah, exactly. Regular video conferencing is huge. Just being able to see somebody's face, their expressions, their body language, it adds so much context that you just don't get with just audio.
It's funny how much we communicate without even realizing it, just through those nonverbal cues.
It's true. It's true. And even little things, the guide mentions sending company swag to your remote team members, T-shirts, mugs, things like that. It helps build that feeling of belonging, even from afar.
I like those little touches. I think they go a long way. Now, before we wrap things up, I did want to touch on one more thing I thought was really interesting from the guide. This idea that growth is a journey, not a destination, right?
Oh, I love that. That one really resonated with me too, because it's so easy to get caught up in that we need to get to X, and then you forget that growth is an ongoing process.
So even after you've implemented all these great strategies we've been talking about, the learning, the adapting, it never really stops, does it?
Never. As your team changes, new challenges will pop up, new questions, and that's good. That means you're pushing yourselves to always be improving.
And that's what makes this whole thing so exciting, I think. Building a team, leading a team, it's always evolving.
It is. It's challenging, but so rewarding.
Absolutely. Well said. So for all of our listeners out there who are on their own scaling journey, what do you think is the most important thing to keep in mind from everything we've talked about today?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
There's so much good stuff in this guide.
I know, right?
If I had to pick just one thing, it's that idea of, like you were saying, purpose-driven decisions.
Yeah.
Because it is so easy to look around and be like, oh, well, that team's doing that, so we should too. Or this is the way it's always been done.
Right.
But every team is different, right?
Totally.
What makes a team truly great is finding what works for them, in their specific situation.
It's about being willing to experiment a little bit, Don't be afraid to try something different and see if it works, even if it's not what everyone else is doing. Love that. So for our listeners out there, I think the big takeaway here is, as you're thinking about scaling your own QA team, don't just follow the crowd.
Yeah.
Really take the time to figure out, what are our strengths? What does our company really need? And then, don't be afraid to carve your own path.
Yeah. And that path might have a few bumps along the way.
Oh, for sure.
But, that's part of it. You learn from those, you adapt, and you keep moving forward.
It's all about those aha moments, right? Where you figure out a solution and you're like, oh, this is what works for us.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so rewarding, that continuous learning, that growth for yourself as a leader and for your whole team.
So well said. To all of our listeners, as you go on your own scaling journey, remember, this isn't just about adding more people. It's about creating a team that's, greater than the sum of its parts. It's about building something truly special.
And remember, there's no single right answer, right? So as you've been listening today, what questions have come up for you? What are you going to try as you take your team from good to great?
Hold on to those questions, listeners. Let them guide your next steps. And until next time, happy testing.